All right, Jeremy and Stephanie Puglisi, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having us, Brad. It's great to be here.
Oh, thanks so much.
So you all are RVers. And not only that, you help people get into RVing with books, and you have a podcast. And the book that I read and I really enjoyed is called See You at the Campground, a guide to discovering community, connection, and a happier family in the great outdoors. It's about road tripping, about RVing, but also camping instead of staying at a hotel. So what I'd like to do with this podcast is the start of the summer vacation season. I know a lot of people are planning vacations. A lot of people might be interested in RVing. We're going to talk about that. But also just want to talk about road trips in general. I know a lot of people I've talked to this summer, instead of getting in a plane to get where they're going to take a road trip. So maybe we can get some advice from the experts. So let's start off with this. How did you two get into RVing? Like, what's your story there?
Well, we actually started as road trippers. So it's nice that you just introed us like that, because really before we had kids, we just loved road trips. We started dating when we were pretty young.
We did a road trip to Jazz Fest in New Orleans when
we were teenagers. And we kind of took off and headed to New Orleans and explored that. And we just traveled that way all the time over years of marriage before we had kids. We loved hopping in a car and driving somewhere and just kind of like seeing the landscape pass outside the window. You know, it's like slow travel to me, as opposed to just getting from point A to B. You know, you stop and enjoy the ride, right? It's a cliche, but I think it's true. And when kids came along, the road trip got a little bit more challenging in some ways when they were babies. So
we really wanted to get out on the road with them. We had twins. And when by the time they were 10 months old, we were really cooped up, really needed to get out of the house. So we decided to do like a hotel weekend at a hotel with a water park attached. And it was a complete disaster. You know, we put the kids to bed, realized that we had nothing to do. We had nowhere to go. That trip did not go well. So then when we got home, we started throwing around the idea of a pop-up camper because we wanted to hit the road with the boys. And soon after, bought the pop-up camper and really, really fell in love with the whole RV lifestyle.
I think more than camping, we saw the pop-up camper as sort of this little portable hotel on wheels. And, you know, it was affordable too. It's not expensive to get a little pop-up camper. So for us, it was like, okay, we were celebrating our 10th anniversary. We had twins. That was the gift that we gave ourselves, to be able to sort of keep road tripping and keep having adventures, even though we had these little babies along with us. And funny enough, along the way, we ended up falling in love with camping. And we really discovered the joys of the campground and sort of introducing our boys to the camping lifestyle. And that was the inspiration for the See You at the Campground book.
When did you all upgrade to the RV, like the full on? Like, what kind of RV do you guys have, and when did you upgrade to that?
So we're on like RV 4 or 5 right now. After the pop-up, most RV owners upgrade every 3 years statistically. So after the pop-up camper, we kind of got sick of setting it up and breaking it down because we were traveling quite a lot and doing multiple stop trips. And a pop-up camper is not really the best thing for that because there's a lot of setup and breakdown. So I'd say 2 years after, we bought a conventional travel trailer. And then after that, a toy hauler. And now we're sitting in more of an upscale travel trailer. I want a motorhome. We constantly debate getting a motorhome. Stephanie's not quite as excited by that idea. But yeah, we've been in traditional RVs now for 6 years, 7 years.
And how often are you on the road now these days?
Well, obviously the last year hasn't been a great, year for RVing for us. So we did take some trips, but typically prior to that, we probably traveled between 50 and 100 nights a year in the RV, just depending on the year.
Yeah, for a lot of RVers, this past year was an amazing year. I mean, a lot of people really did hit the road, but for us, we have kids in school and we're in New Jersey where some of the travel restrictions were a bit tighter. So we probably canceled more trips than we went on this past year, but now we're kind of getting back in full swing for the year ahead.
All right. So Stephanie, you mentioned one of the reasons you're a big proponent of road trips. It's like that slow travel. I mean, what do you think, besides that, what are the benefits of road tripping versus flying? What have you all found?
Repeatedly, I have 2 of my boys are now in middle school. So we've been doing this for over a decade with them. And they've spent a lot of time in the back of the car in their childhood. And it was so funny over the years. Teacher after teacher just kept saying, like, your boys just have such a wide breadth, like, of understanding of the country. Like, they have such a, expanse of like weird knowledge was pretty much what they were saying.
Their red states and their blue states.
Yeah. And too, like, it was really funny over the years. I have no idea how this came about, but somehow they got really interested in real estate, like as we were traveling, because they realized so many places look different than where we are at the Jersey Shore. And they would ask, like, what does that house sell for? What do houses cost here? And so we ended up with this funny game of like opening up the Zillow app, no matter where we were in the country. And the kids got fascinated with how much the cost of living is different. So, I mean, I know that's a really random example, but I just think that over the years of them staring out the window in the back seat, they just have seen the country in a way that you don't see it when you're up there thousands of feet in the air.
We go to South Carolina a lot. If we had just been flying in and out of Myrtle Beach, our kids would not know a lot about South Carolina. But since we're road tripping to Myrtle Beach or Charleston or wherever it might be, like, our 12-year-old boys could explain the culture of South Carolina in a pretty sophisticated way.
And like the whole Route 95 corridor. And they're like, they know what it looks like going into Richmond, and they know those stops along the way. I think road tripping just this past month or 2 months ago, we were heading from point A to point B, and Savannah was along the way, and we weren't planning on stopping. And I looked at Jeremy, I said, let's stop. And my boys just got this wonderful 2 hours in Savannah, and we ate at this ridiculously good hot dog truck. And I know my kids well enough to know now that 5 years from now, they'll mention that hot dog truck in Savannah.
There's nothing wrong with a plane ride. I mean, we take planes places, but you don't have that serendipity, right? I mean, that spontaneous stop. You can't do that on a plane or a cruise. And we do that a lot in the RV. All right, let's pull over here and just grab lunch in this town and check it out for an hour or two. And those are very rich experiences as well, even though they weren't planned.
I also like road trips because it feels more relaxing. Like I don't like flying. I've decided I do not like flying. It's my least favorite thing. It's so undignified. You have to stand in line,
getting herded.
Yeah, getting herded, and then you get on the plane. You're kind of stuffed in there, and I when I'm on a road trip, I also like the feeling of road trip. Like, you feel like you're in control. Like, I hate being like, well, my flight's delayed, I can't do anything about that. With a road trip, it's like, well, not a problem. I can keep going.
And I think that was one of the reasons it's been such a pleasure for us to travel this way with our kids was, the joy of having those decisions at your fingertips every minute. You get a lot less stressed, right? You can always take a time out with your kids and say, let's just relax. Let's just stop at the side of the road at a rest stop and kick a soccer ball around, and just having those choices with us, even bringing along their things that help them feel a little more comfortable, right, has been a real blessing.
Well, in an RV, one of the things that we preach about a lot is you can pull over in a rest area and make lunch in your own kitchen. You can use your own bathroom. Like, we don't have to use the restrooms on the New York Freeway if we don't want to. So you use the word control, and I think that's a great way to put it. It's this interesting combination of freedom and control that makes the experience pretty awesome for us.
I also like the feeling on a road trip that you're like, no one knows where I'm at. I also like, for some reason, I like that. Like, when I'm in the middle of New Mexico, I'm like, no one knows where I'm at. I for some reason, it just feels so good to have that feeling.
Well, and this is like the year of the road trip to some degree. I mean, I think that COVID has made us all re-examine how we travel, and you're not the only one feeling that way right now. I mean, I'm dying to get back out on the road this summer.
Well, let's talk about a little bit about RVing, because I know a lot of people, they like the idea of RVing. They probably saw something on Instagram, someone's doing the van life thing or whatever, and like, I want to do that, but they're afraid to make that leap because they don't know if they're actually going to like it, right? They like the idea, but they don't know if they're going to like it. So any advice for people who want to test the waters with RVing?
I think that it is so smart to rent instead of buying an RV straight out. 10 years ago, that wasn't as easy as it is now. Now there's all of these RV sharing, platforms, which are basically like the Airbnbs of RVing. And you can easily find a nice small motorhome, which is what I suggest that you start with when you're looking for a rental. And you can just try it out and see if it's for you. Now, the price tag is a little shocking for some people. Sometimes people think, a rental RV vacation is going to be cheaper, maybe than a fly and drive or a hotel stay. That's not necessarily the case. Remember, you're paying for convenience, right? You're going to be driving your little hotel room around. You get to park it wherever you want. You get to have food in your kitchen and your own bathroom along the way. So actually, you're paying for a lot of those conveniences. And it ends up, we've found over the years, we spend about as much on a rental RV vacation as we would on a fly and hotel stay
But if you're
vacation.
testing out the concept of buying an RV, yes, it might be expensive to rent a motorhome for the weekend. But if you spend $600 renting a motorhome for the weekend and then decide you don't want to buy one, you just saved $100,000. Or if you rent it and you say, well, I love it, I feel more confident going ahead and buying it. It is really, truly a great way to just kind of get a taste of it and see if you want to make a bigger financial plunge.
I would caution people that it's not the whole experience, right? Like when you rent an RV, people have a blast doing it. And people that have done an RV rental usually say like their kids remembered it forever. It was such an amazing adventure. But you have to remember there is a steep learning curve with RVs. So you're not really getting the whole experience of having your own personal RV stocked with all of your stuff and, the comfort level of that. It is going to be a little more stressful because you don't know how to empty the tanks like we do as RV owners. So you're going to have to figure that out.
Oh, so can we stop for like a quick pause and a side tour on like nomenclature? So you've been guys saying RVing, motorhomes,
They're all RVs.
They're all RVs. Okay. And like
a pop-up camper is an RV, a travel trailer is an RV, a motorhome's an RV.
A pop-up camper that we owned first. They're all RVs. And then there's two main types of RVs. There's a motorhome, which is the kind you drive. And there's a towable, which is the kind you pull behind a tow vehicle. And for a rental, a motorhome is so much easier because it really feels like you're driving a U-Haul truck. It really does. It's not a big deal. I was just behind the wheel of one this past weekend and I hadn't been behind the wheel of a motorhome in over a year and it was fine. A towable, I think there's a steeper learning curve on. Hitching up, unhitching.
Like in the popular conception, in the popular mind, like an RV is a motorhome, but actually 90% of RVs sold are towable and only 10% are motorhomes, but it's motorhomes that's what everybody thinks of.
Gotcha. Is a pop-up camper a towable?
Yes.
Yes, it is. Yep. And it's this little nice small box and then it opens up and you get the tent ends and that really nice, beautiful, like very dreamy kind of open tent experience.
So you recommend for people who are wanting to test the waters, don't go the towable pop-up camper, just check out a motorhome.
Well, I think that depends. Like if you're thinking about buying a pop-up camper, why not rent a pop-up camper? If you're thinking about buying a motorhome, why not rent a motorhome? I guess it just depends on what your intention is. If you just want a vacation, I think is what Stephanie's saying. Yeah, take the motorhome. It's easy.
I would say find your under 30-foot Class C motorhome. And that's going to be the easiest thing to kind of get around in for your first time.
Okay, so a lot of people who are doing the RV, they want to do it, but they've got little kids and they're concerned, my kid's going to like this. What's been your experience? I mean, should people be concerned about that? Or is there, an age you recommend you start taking your kids in an RV, or can you go right when they're fresh out of the womb, basically?
Well, we did go. They were pretty fresh out of the womb.
One of them was like,
our third was 6 weeks old, I think, the first time we took him camping. And he's lived his whole life, at the campground. But I do think that one piece of feedback we hear a lot, right? Like our kids have been doing this their whole life. But the one piece of feedback that we hear is that people who start older with their kids wish they had started younger, right? Like when you wait to get to that middle school age, is anything cool in middle school, right? Do middle schoolers actually enjoy anything? Or, they've kind of gotten that too cool for school air about them. We've heard that from a lot of parents, that when they raised their kids with this experience, it was something that they looked forward to every year.
And conversely, we've heard from people, well, I don't want to buy an RV. My kids are too young. They're not going to remember it. I want to wait till they're older. And Stephanie and I have really never believed that. Like, we think there's incredible value in traveling with your kids, even if they are at an age where they won't technically remember it, because we've always felt like you're training them to be travelers. You're training them to be road trippers. You're training them to be flexible. So we always tell people, start as young as you can possibly start. I mean, a sleeping baby can keep you, a baby that can't sleep is going to keep you awake at home or in the RV. So you might as well be somewhere beautiful and exciting.
I'll also say that we didn't fly because we had our camper and our RVing trips. We didn't fly with our boys until they were, I think, 7 and 4 or somewhere in that age range. And by the time we did fly with them, they knew how to travel. Like they were such great travelers that our first airport experience was just like seamless. Like they were fine. They knew how to be team players, right? Because we've taught them to break down a campsite or set up a campsite or carry, luggage around. And they had no problems. And I was like, I really had felt like it was the perfect kind of segue into different kinds of travel with them.
Our kids know how to be in new environments and to thrive in new environments. And we really feel like travel's contributed to that. Like they're not afraid to go out for this team or to step into this new environment or to go meet this new friend. And we think that part of that is all the traveling over the years.
Well, we also kind of trained them to have a little more independence at the campground too, right? Like we would be at these campgrounds and it would be kind of like a pretty safe place to be able to teach them how to ride their bikes. Or I think all three of our kids learned how to ride bikes at a campground. And then you can say, okay, you can go to the camp store, right? By yourself for the first time when they're however old. And they learn how to like have money in their pocket and go to the camp store. And I think a lot of those life events were a little easier for us to train and manage because we were in these little pockets of community that a campground is.
All right. So one last question about the RVs before we move on. So you mentioned cost for renting one, about the same price you'd pay for a fly in hotel. So we're looking at $2,000, $3,000?
Yeah, so usually I would say the kind that I mentioned, like the motorhome, would be 200 something a night. Obviously, our prices here in the Northeast may be a little higher than some other people's prices, but in the 200 range per night. And then you have a campground cost, remember. So that's going to vary. If you stay at a public campground, you could have one as low as $20, $30 a night. Or if you stay at a resort or Fort Wilderness in Disney World, you could pay $200 a night.
And then what's the price? What's the going rate for an RV, motorhome, or pop-up camper these days?
So like a pop-up camper, brand new, could start at under $10,000. And then like the conventional travel trailers that we're in could be 20 to 30 to 40. The big fifth wheels can be 60, 70, $80,000. And then generally speaking, motorhomes start at about $80,000 and you could go as high as you want. If you're in a customized Prevost or something, you could be spending $1 million. But there's a lot of plus minus in the $100,000 mark for motorhomes.
Yeah. So it just depends on what you want. You get as fancy as you want or simple.
Yeah, and if you get a diesel or a gas engine in a motorhome. So if you get a diesel engine, then you're looking more at over $200,000. If you're staying in a gas engine, it's going to be typically less than $200,000. The RV industry has done a great job at having like a really wide variety of price points and floor plans, and there's way more to choose from than when you're like buying a truck, right? When I go to buy a truck, there's the 3 or 4 major brands. There's not many options for like floor plans. People get really actually flustered and confused RV shopping because there's so many options, so it's kind of like a positive and a negative.
And then I think you did the cost breakdown in the book. Once you make the investment and buy an RV, like your cost of vacation start plummeting.
Yeah, for sure. And you can control your costs, right? I could splurge on every RV vacation. But you can also eat in. I mean, the biggest cost when we go away with our RV is food. Like eating out all of those meals with 3 kids adds up. And my 2 older boys eat like adults. So our sticker shock at restaurant bills is really high. And in the RV, we'll have breakfast, lunch, and dinner some days all at the RV. Even in Disney World, we'll do breakfast and dinner at the RV and maybe have lunch in a park or something. I mean, you can just save so much money on that food price point.
Eating out when we're staying in a hotel could easily be $300 a day. With our RV and our own kitchen, it could be $300 a week.
Same as our food bill at home, really.
All right. So a lot of people are going to take an RV, but a lot of people are just going to go on a road trip just in their cars. You guys have been doing this for years. What are the biggest mistakes you've made or you see people make when planning and executing a road trip?
So I really think that these days you have to plan ahead. I know everybody loves the idea of like jumping in the car and let's see how far we go before we need to stop. I've found that actually only causes stress. Every time we want to be casual about our plans, it really causes stress as opposed to like feeling free and, adventurous. So I do recommend really knowing where you're going to stop for the night.
And there's freedom in the discipline. Like Stephanie's a very disciplined trip planner. And then that opens up a lot of time on the trip and a lot of freedom on the trip because we're not worried about getting this reservation or getting tickets for that or renting kayaks here. We do all of that ahead of the time, even though it might not sound as fun to do it that way, but we plan a trip, from top to bottom, and we leave open spaces.
I mean, I learned early on, you think, let's just see how it goes. And then the one day that you're in this town is the day that is the Monday when they don't do the rafting tours that you wanted to go on, and you didn't know that ahead of time. Or you find out that just a lot of things get booked up in advance. Some of the most magical experiences we've had, like I'm remembering going out on that chuck wagon ride in in South Dakota, and just having this amazing night of having this steak dinner out in the middle of the Black Hills. And those are things that sell out. And you just have to plan ahead if you want to have some of these amazing experiences.
I think another mistake people are going to make this summer is heading to the most popular places. I'm all about going to Yellowstone. I'm all about going to Yosemite, Acadia National Park. But if you're going to go to Acadia National Park on a summer weekend and you plan on doing the Park Loop Road, it's probably not going to be fun. You're probably not going to be able to park, This summer, with the number of people road tripping, this might be the summer to do the Beartooth Mountains in Idaho instead of Yellowstone. This might be the summer to do North Cascades in Washington instead of Olympic. And it really could be the summer to find some things that are off the beaten track a little bit.
And not just off the beaten track, but off of peak hours. So another mistake that people make, and we see it all the time as, travel writers and people tell you about their experiences places, the difference between experiencing an amazing location at 8:00 in the morning when you're the only, people there, or one of the handful, and at 1 p.m. in the afternoon when the tour buses have arrived and everybody's flooding a place. It's just night and day. There's no comparison between the same place. We've been in these places at these different times, and it's wow, you just really have a hard time enjoying with the crowds. I know that's the case with, I think, places like Mount Rushmore, right? You hear people talk about Mount Rushmore, oh my gosh, we went on the 4th of July, you couldn't breathe. There were people everywhere. And so we really encourage people to find those off-peak times, whether we've always gone to popular places early in the morning. Some people go later in the day. Also go during the week as much as possible instead of the weekend. Really try to take yourself to places outside of peak hours.
Gotcha. All right. So biggest mistakes, Kate. First off, you want to plan. Don't try to do I'm going to fling it road trip. And then don't go to popular places. You're not going to have a good time. And then try to plan your things off of peak hours.
Can I say one more?
Yeah, go for it.
Because I'm a mom. I'm going to tell you, never be without food and drinks.
That's a good one.
I think if everybody gets cranky when they're thirsty and when they're hungry. And so we really always have food and beverages, coolers in the back with some cold drinks. Jeremy's the king of the cold drink cooler. And everybody can get a break, have a snack, and have a refreshing drink when they need it. And that makes a difference.
Well, speaking of, what's your philosophy towards road trip snacks? Do you buy them all before you leave, or do you buy stuff along the way at the gas stations you see along the freeway?
Yes and yes. Our kids devour. We pack a lot of snacks because it's obviously cheaper to buy a box of Cliff Bars than to buy one at the rest stop every single time. But no matter how much Stephanie does pack in terms of snacks and drinks, we do seem to plow through them and then end up refueling along the way at the Pilot Flying J or whatever it is.
Oh, my kids are suckers for the snack aisle in a gas station. So we kind of do a balance, right? We always make sure we have healthier food. I love those single serving hummus with crackers or things like that are okay, guys, we can take a break from the slushy machine, at the gas station. But then at the same time, you feel it's kind of part of the experience. They get excited for those rest stops. And so you can't completely take away the joy of a 12-year-old boy wandering, the Pilot Flying J.
Yeah, we just drove 5 hours of a yogurt, totally fly.
Yeah, so we try to balance it. I feel that's the case with everything on a road trip. If it gets too much, right? If you're eating out every meal, your kids start to get pretty cranky and miserable, and you do too. And then if you're not eating out at all, you're missing out on the joy of a food culture in a place and experiencing that. So it sounds so corny, but it really is about balance, and that balance is going to change every single road trip that you go on.
All right, so pre-pack some snacks, but also make room for the Funyuns at the Love's country store.
Combos, if you're our kids.
Oh, yeah, the
combos.
combo. Yeah, my kids love the combos too. So let's talk about this. What do you think is the right length for a road trip?
So in terms of how far you drive, or in terms of like how many days you go away?
Ooh, that's both.
So we drove to Mount Rushmore to South Dakota. And on the way out, we broke up the trip and stayed like in Indiana. And it was totally great. It was totally fine. We had an amazing trip in South Dakota. It was one of our best family trips ever. We were out there for 2 weeks. But then we drove straight home. We stayed
20
one night,
hours maybe.
And it was just like 3 10-hour days of driving in a row, and we were all miserable. Like that just did not work for our family. So in retrospect, I wish we had stopped a little more, had a day off, done something, done the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland or something on the way home to break that up. So multiple days of driving in a row is definitely too much for us.
Everybody's going to have a different tolerance. I found after a decade with the boys, and we have gone all over the country. My rule over the last few years that I, try to stay firm on with Jeremy, but sometimes I give in, is that if I have to drive more than one full day, right? Like more than a 12-hour day plus some, we're flying. So we used to do a lot more longer, but I was like, you know what? If it's more than that and we're just going to be blowing through from point A to point B, and we're not going to be stopping, and enjoying the sights, then let's fly. And then oftentimes we rent a car and do a nice road trip loop. Like we did this in the Pacific Northwest. We flew into Seattle. We did an amazing road trip all the way down to the Redwoods and back up on a loop. We hit so many amazing places. And that was a better way to do that as opposed to driving across country, which would have been miserable.
And that's tied into us having 3 younger kids, right? If we were retired, you take your time getting wherever you're going. But we often have a 10-day window before there's the next soccer tryout or before school's back in session or whatever. So we will definitely travel differently when the kids are out of the picture.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I think that now I just go, 10 hours, our boys can actually get through 10 hours, no problem. Longer than that, I'm going to tap out.
So it sounds like here when you're planning a road trip, if you're just trying to get to a destination that's far away because you want to do something there, your best bet, fly there. But if you have time and you need to get that destination, but you have time to get there to make stops throughout road tripping's okay.
Yeah. And I think do a loop, right? This is something that we've learned. Like if you're just doing the same route there and back, you lose the magic of that road trip, right? But if you can plan a loop like we did out in South Dakota, our trip out to South Dakota, or out in the Pacific Northwest where we went out, in a big circle, basically through Washington, Oregon, and California. So every stop along the way is different and fun.
Well, we had 28 days to go to the Pacific Northwest. So we chose to fly, and there was 2 days of flying and 26 days in the Pacific Northwest. If we had towed our RV during those, 26 days or whatever, half of it would have been driving.
Getting there.
So, flying and driving is perfectly fine too. You can maximize your time at a place if it's far away.
Gotcha. All right. So do you guys have like a limit? So 10 hours a day is probably your limit on what you're willing to drive?
It gets dicey after that.
We just did. What did we just do? 17 hours?
We drove straight back from Florida to New Jersey. But
17 hours. But we had to, and we did it. And the thing is we talked before about like training our kids. Honestly, like our kids are so well trained that we did it. We were just miserable because we just kept swapping.
And let's be honest too, the devices helped on that type of drive.
Yeah.
We're not playing roadside bingo the whole time.
Right. It's not 12 hours of the license plate game. The kids are staring at their phones blessedly.
Well, I want to talk more about that screen time on road trips. But before have you guys done the thing where I know there are some families that I know that do this where they'll leave at like 9 o'clock at night so the kids sleep and then they drive during the night. Have you guys done that thing? That
we
tactic? Just about every time.
We tried.
Yeah, that can work really, really well. And like for us, we're in New Jersey and we road trip a lot up into New England. We go to Cape Cod a lot. And by doing that, you miss all the morning traffic around New York City or around DC. That allows us to go north or south and get past some major metropolitan areas. And our kids actually love that. They actually, for whatever reason, they love packing up the car, getting in at 9 o'clock at night and knowing they get to conk out while we do all the hard work, basically.
Yeah. And the only issue for parents to consider with that is, will your kids actually sleep? When our older two were little and we tried it a couple of times, it was not successful because they didn't sleep through the night like they were supposed to. But now that they're older, they'll just pass out in the car again once we get in. So will your kids sleep? And do you have the stamina to get through the next day? After driving all night, right? And your kids are ready for vacation because they're well rested, and are you, right? So it's just going to be different for everybody, whether that works, but it's a great strategy if you've got, the stamina to do it.
All right, you mentioned screens and your kids. Like, what's your guys' take on keeping kids entertained on a road trip?
Well, my most important take is that it's not my business what anybody else does with screens and their kids. So I just want to, so we'll share what we've done,
share what you've done.
Our struggle. But I think it's one of those areas that people get so super judgy about, and it just drives me crazy because we all have, our own kids and they're so different. And also, I feel like it's unfair. I wrote about this in our book a little bit. Like, we're the first generation of parent that had to navigate this, right? Like, when we were young, our parents, there weren't screens to bring on vacation with us. So they didn't have to worry about it. It wasn't an option. Now it's so much work to manage screen time. And there's going to be certain parents that just don't want to work more on vacation and manage screen time. So I understand that. And I just want to give a high five to every parent out there that has to spend so much of their life dealing with this issue, because it can be exhausting.
But we're liberal with it, like in the car on the trip there, right? But when we're in a location, when we're at Glacier National Park for 12 days, we really cut it down to close to nothing. But then again, like when we were at Glacier, we did a 12-mile round trip hike out to a glacier. All our kids did that hike. It was a 9-hour hike. If they wanted to come home and watch a movie that night, like, we are totally cool with that.
That's okay. We didn't want to do anything.
You earned it,
I can say that I was really strict with screens when they were younger. So now that they're older, they have their devices in the car. But when they were little, they didn't. And I really wanted them to learn how to stare out the window. And I really wanted my kids to learn how to be bored and just kind of like let their imaginations roam. And I am glad I made that choice, that I just wasn't, we never had a DVD player, like, a car with the DVD players in the back of the seats or whatever. And we never bought a car with that, because I was just like, I don't want that to be the default when we get in a car. I want kids to look out the window. It was always really important to me.
That useful boredom, that like autobiographical planning, that daydreaming, So look, we've definitely had our struggles with that along the way. Just like any other family, there's no magical answer to it. We were camping just last weekend, and the boys asked if they could watch a movie in the RV Saturday night. And I got totally annoyed at them. I was like, it's beautiful out. It's our first real trip of the season. Go outside, be kids. You're not watching a movie right now.
But then other times it's like, yeah, it's cozy. Go in the RV and watch a movie. And I think I'm glad that we were strict at the time, because I think I put a schedule in the book too that we used to follow, where like I would do everything in units. Like, okay, we'd have snack time, and then maybe we'd have some game time, and then maybe we'd have some audiobook. Our boys loved audiobooks for years, and we'd listen to audiobooks on the way to any destination. A lot of the time I try to like link it to where we were going. For example, I always remember listening to the I Survived Mount St. Helens novel on our way to Mount St. Helens, right? Like things like that were really fun. So not having screens forced us to come up with things we liked together, right? Everybody had their own Sirius XM channel that, it'd be like, okay, it's your turn. Which channel do you want? And our boys would pick Elvis or, the Beatles channel, and they would get 4 songs on each channel. So we did spend years and years being super creative with our kids in that time. And now, if they're a little bit older, fine, be on your phone while we're driving.
Yeah, our philosophy, so my kids, they're 10 and 7. Our philosophy on road trips is you get 2 hours, no screens, 1 hour with screen.
And that's what we really did for years. Like we did those blocks of time, and then, okay, now here's my phone and you can watch a show. And it worked well.
Do you guys do like license plate games? Pinch bug, slug bug.
Yeah, Stephanie has all these like card games and these national park trivia games. These like very compact games that were actually in the RV in a cabinet right now, right by where I am.
The 3-second rule is a really fun one for the car, right? Because like you give them a topic and they have to name a certain amount of things, and it's just anything with just cards, right, is very fun for the car ride, and they really enjoy those things too. something I recommend is keeping separate things that you only enjoy when you're in your RV or you're on a road trip, because they become special and they look forward to them.
We kept that National Park trivia in the glove compartment of the truck. So if they got no G, pull that out. That came out and we played.
Do you guys split up driving on a road trip?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I tow the RV, but if it's just a road trip, we totally split it up. But when it's towing the RV, I do the towing.
Yeah, I used to, and then Jeremy wanted a certain size RV, and I tapped out of the towing at that point. It makes me really anxious and stressed. I believe I can, so I don't, I believe women can do everything, right? Fine. But I'm not comfortable.
I'm also a horrible navigator. So when she was towing and I was in charge of navigation, it did not really go well. So it just was a better matchup for me towing.
And you're bad at managing the snack stand that the boys require.
And what do you all do to keep yourselves entertained? Or do you just like to zone out and just watch the road?
No, we love podcasts. We listen to podcasts.
We're podcasters and we love listening to podcasts. So we devour podcasts on the road.
And music. Yeah. But I can't listen to audiobooks when Jeremy's driving because he says they put him to sleep.
I don't know why, but they put me to sleep.
They put you to sleep. Thinking of that, I think there's a new podcast series out, or there's something where some companies hired celebrities, and you can do a road trip and you'll have Kevin Costner telling you about the history of where you're at. It's real time because somehow it uses GPS and it can tell where you're at, and you basically have Kevin Costner telling you about the buffalo here. Have you heard about it?
I'm in.
You're ringing a bell because I think that somebody in my work mentioned this to me, but I haven't actually dug in and checked this out.
Okay, I'm going to dig in and find it. We'll link to it in the show.
Yeah.
I remember I thought that sounded kind of cool. I'd want Kevin Costner telling me about Dances with Wolves or something. All right. So speaking of planning your road trips, going back to this, when you plan a road trip, you have things you want to do in advance. You want to do the chuck wagon dinner in the middle of nowhere, South Dakota. But do you also kind of schedule time to do stuff off the beaten path? So you can visit the thing or the world's largest rocking chair if it somehow shows up on your road trip?
Well, South Dakota is a great example of doing that because in one sense, you could look at the ride out to the Badlands and Mount Rushmore as being boring if you didn't know that there were all these bizarre roadside attractions.
But Corn Palace.
The Corn Palace. And then there was that outdoor sculpture garden. I'm forgetting the name of it. It was just so quirky and bizarre and weird. And it's near Mitchell, South Dakota.
And we did not plan on stopping. And these sculptures were just rising out of nowhere. We were like, oh, we have to. And we had to actually get off on a dirt road to get there. And we were like,
beautiful, though.
Are we getting lost here? And it was so much fun.
It was like a trip highlight, So we absolutely really do like to build in that stuff. And again, sometimes we are in a rush to get to vacation because we have kids and a limited time. And when we are older and retired, we'll take even more time for that. But I think that is a huge part of the joy of RVing and road tripping in general is to allow yourself to just take that left turn and find something you weren't planning on finding.
And I'm sure you guys have written guides about this, but do you think the guides, road trip guides, are useful to kind of give you an itinerary so you don't have to think too much about it?
I love guides that offer you a framework, right? For suggestions. And then you can curate it according to your own personal preferences. I think people that know themselves have great traveling experiences, and people that don't know themselves end up unhappy, right? Because what they did is they took a guide from maybe some outside online cliff climbing adventurer, and they were like, I'm going to do this. And they don't have it, that's not their wheelhouse maybe, or they're not actually going to be happy staying at a glamping tent where they have to go to a bathhouse in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. You have to know, is this going to make me happy or miserable?
Well, I used to all the time buy hiking guides, and it would say oh, it's a moderate hike, great for kids. And we would go do this hike that was horribly difficult. And eventually
I had a baby on my back.
Stop using those hiking books, and now we just ask a park ranger.
Well, I also love
All Trails.
All Trails. Thank you. I was like,
yeah.
I was about to say All Stays.
Yeah, I like All Trails a lot. We've used that a lot when we've gone on trips. So you're big proponents of staying at camping grounds instead of staying at a hotel or motel when you're on a road trip. What are the benefits of camping while on a road trip?
It's less expensive. you're definitely in nature more. You're stepping out of your tent or your cabin or your RV and you are outside, right? So it does force you to be outside a lot more than a hotel. And for us with little kids, they step out of the RV and they can be kids. They can run around. They can make some noise. They can start throwing the football around. In a hotel, if they step out into the hallway, our kids do run around in the hallway, but they're not supposed to, right? I mean, stepping outside is a big part of it. Getting out into nature is part of it.
I think kids travel can be very challenging for kids, and that's okay, right? And they need to decompress oftentimes at the end of a day of structured, tourism, if that's what you're doing, right? And even a hike, yes, they're being active on it, but they're also being deliberately guided in a certain direction in a certain activity. And our boys have always needed that free outdoor decompression time at the end of a day of travel. It's been such a blessing to us to discover that way of, staying, that type of accommodation, because they can ride their bikes, they go to the playground, they go to the basketball hoop, and it just allows everybody to relax and chill out, even though, we had a very active, fun, adventuring day.
And they are almost like little communities, each of these campgrounds. A lot of people say it's almost like what the American downtown was. It's like your neighbors are friendly, your kids can roam around a little bit. We always feel very safe at campgrounds. So it gives them a sense of community at a campground that maybe our neighborhoods aren't totally providing right now.
When you guys choose campgrounds, are you looking for certain amenities?
So we like both state parks and national parks with limited amenities, and we love the RV resorts, and it's kind of part of our business is to see all of them. So what we've loved to do over the years is we'll do a 2-stop trip, and we'll go to the national park campground first, like we did the Platte River campground in Sleeping Bear Dunes. And there's really no amenities there, and there's no hookups. It's more simple. It's a more back to nature experience. So we'll do something like that for 5 days, and then we'll go to the off the hook RV resort and sort of reward the boys and okay, there's a pool here, there's a playground, there's food on site, and then we can dump our tanks there as well. So we actually love doing both and often do both in the same trip.
Yeah, can you tell us about the world of private campgrounds? Because I think when most people think of car camping, they're thinking of state or national parks. That's what I've done. But in my experience, I think other people experience this too. And I think it's really bad right now, particularly the national parks, is finding a camping spot can be impossible. Sometimes you have to schedule a year in advance. What's with private campgrounds? What are those like?
So private campgrounds really are a great option for this year. And you're 1,000% right that the most popular national park campgrounds are booked solid. You're not getting a site inside Yosemite National Park this summer unless you just get crazy, crazy lucky. So then the private campgrounds are going to offer an alternative. A lot of times there are great private campgrounds outside of the national parks, 15 minutes outside, 30 minutes outside. They're going to cost more. They're going to have more amenities, particularly for RVers. The sites are oftentimes going to be smaller and less private because oftentimes they are more built for RVers. So a lot of times tent campers don't necessarily love those types of campgrounds, but they do provide a really great option. If you can't get into that national park you're dreaming about, I would totally tell people try a KOA campground, around Great Smoky Mountains National Park. If you want to be in the park right now, it's going to be difficult to get a site. But there's 5 or 6 KOAs surrounding the camp, around the national park, and they are definitely going to have more availability. They're not necessarily as stunning or as beautiful, and they are going to cost more, but a great way to go if you can't get that dream site inside a national park.
Yeah, I was looking up about KOA because I remember when I was a kid road tripping, going down I-40, and you'd see KOA and they have the family circus kids. I guess they were the spokespeople. Are they still the spokespeople for?
No, but that relationship that was for decades. Yeah,
right.
That was they did the KOA catalog covers. Always had that on the cover.
Yeah, the family circus. And I didn't know anything about that, and so I looked up KOA. What is this? I was impressed. They had pictures this actually looks really nice. I always look kind of chintzy the way they advertised on billboards, but they had showers and they had campfires. It looked pretty nice.
Well, they guarantee certain things too. So there's always going to be laundry facilities there. There's always a dog park at a KOA. So they are reliable and it's more standardized. And there's 500 of them in the country, and some are just kind of right off the interstate and nothing spectacular. But then there are others that are incredibly beautiful, in Cape Hatteras. There's a KOA right on the beach in Cape Hatteras. You can be camping right next to the ocean, just walk over the dunes and you're right at the beach. So there's a wide variety of types of campgrounds in like the KOA system.
So, okay, benefits, pros of private campgrounds, you have some lot of nice amenities, but it's going to be what's the going rate for like a night at a KOA?
Probably $60 to $100, depending on the region of the country you're in. Yeah, I mean, you definitely could, and if you're tent camping, maybe you could get something for 40 or 50. If you want the RV site with water, electric, and sewer, you're definitely looking 60 and up. Campground prices are kind of shocking people at private campgrounds, because a lot of private campgrounds have moved to what they call dynamic pricing, which is really based on supply and demand, and
more like hotels have always done.
And because there has been this massive influx of millions of new campers, they just are able to charge more.
Will you all ever stay in a motel while on a road trip, like a roadside, like an old?
We're going to Yellowstone this summer, and we're staying at all campgrounds. We're flying in. And then we're staying at all campgrounds. And then the last 2 nights, we're in a hotel in Jackson Hole. Because we just wanted to like have a pool, and we wanted to be right downtown. Like we wanted to be able to kind of roll out of bed and walk around. So we do.
We tend to prefer Airbnbs, I feel like, when we travel without our camper, just because we are so used to having our own kitchen and bathroom, and it just works better for us. But our boys are such little travelers, and they love a hotel experience. They just love the discovery. They love going to a place and saying, what's our accommodation going to be like?
They also love leaving their AirPods at the hotel room. And a weird thing I discovered, if you leave your AirPods in the RV, no problem. If you leave them in a hotel room, they're gone. So there's just all these little differences that jump out at me when we stay in a hotel. And like, I always come back to wanting to be in the RV. And out of everyone in the family, I'm probably the most dedicated to it.
Oh yeah. Max told me the other day, he said, Mom, I kind of miss airports. Isn't that weird? He just said that to me. And he goes, just getting there and going and getting a Jamba Juice. And I just realized to him, it's a whole story, right? Like every type of travel has its whole thing that goes along with it. And those are just like different types of memories that they're making. And I love it all. I really do.
And one last question. So what would be your recommendation for someone who wants to start road tripping? Like, how to get started? Like, should they just start with like a weekend road trip? Should they go like plan a big one?
No, don't be over ambitious.
Okay.
That's my biggest recommendation, right? Is, first of all, have a great destination for sure. I think too many people, I always say people are like, oh, well, how do you hike with kids? Well, first of all, don't take them to a path in the woods and call it a hike, right? Of course they're going to be bored. It's a walk in the woods, and they're kids. Like take them to an amazing waterfall or something that really sparks their curiosity. And the same thing goes with a road trip. Like, have a destination that's exciting and fun, and it's a good payoff.
And you got to if you're doing it with kids, you do have to consider their interests and hobbies too. Like my next thing, which my boys don't know about yet, I'm going to surprise them with this, is I'm going to do a boys trip to Boston and do a Red Sox game because we're Red Sox fans, but because we want to see Fenway. So, you have to consider what everybody likes on the trip.
Well, hey, Stephanie, Jeremy, where can people go to learn more about your work?
So it's the RV Atlas everywhere. It's the RV Atlas podcast. It's the RVAtlas.com. It's the RV Atlas on Instagram. And then the 2 most recent books are Where Should We Camp Next, which is a 50-state guide to the best campgrounds in the country. And as you mentioned before, See You at the Campground. And you can get those at bookstores anywhere.
Fantastic. Well, Stephanie, Jeremy, thanks for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, thanks so much for having us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brett.
My guests today were Jeremy and Stephanie Puglisi. They're the author of several books on road tripping and camping. Latest is See You at the Campground. It's available on Amazon.com and bookstores everywhere. You can find out more information about their work at their website, thervatlas.com, where you can also check out their podcast there. Also check out our show notes at aom.is/roadtrip, where you can find links to resources where you can delve deeper into this topic.